Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Uh, Marcelo Lampkowski here, working as a data application architect at FSC. I'm here today with my colleagues, Joanna Nowakowska, the Deputy Director of the Technology and Information Unity, working with the data analytics learning. We also have today our colleague Chong Shan Zhang, that is a data analyst at FSC that has worked both with certificate holders and certificate bodies, and also our colleagues Vishal, Siva, and Karpagavali from Congruent, our tech partner in this hackathon. And we are here today to answer some of your questions and also to touch base on some of the questions that came during this week through our Slack channel. So basically today we are going to do a quick review about how the support process will work during the hackathon. I know that most of you are already aware of that, but it's never enough to touch base on that. And also covering some points, for example, some questions that came through the presentation from last week about using of non-open source widgets or apps in the solutions that you're supposed to present to FSC. Also to cover some questions about the resource, how the resource should be used, how should I use the resource for apps 1, 2, and 3. And also something about data import. Some participants had questions during this last week about how to importing data to the solution on Dynamics, some error messages that they got, and how you can solve this problem. And also something about using the schemas, the flexibility that we are giving participants on using the schemas that we provided, especially resources number 2 and 4. And in the end, we are going to cover doing like an overview of the chain of custody certification process, because some participants are worried about the workflow, how this certification process actually happens, right? And if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to add to the chat box and we will be monitoring everything. And also we have a Google form that you can send questions using this tool. For the support process during the hackathon, I know that we covered this topic in the last week's presentation, but just to remember, our main channel, our main communication channel with the participants is our Slack channel, DocuSign2020.slack.com. How this process works, participants can add the questions or their requests or asking for support in this Slack channel. I will check the Slack channel, and if it's something that I can answer right away, I will reply to you. If it's something that's not technical, you will be responded right away. If it is a matter that we need to dive deeper in getting an answer for you, if it's too technical, if it's something that we need to check, for example, with our legal department, we will take a look on that, and then after that we will add the question and the answer to this question in the Slack channel as well. In case of technical issues related, for example, to CRM, you consume APIs on Dynamics, I will pass this question to our partners from Congruent Information Technology Supporting Team, and they will analyze the issue and reply also in the Slack channel. Okay, so basically, just to cover how this process is working right now. It's now starting for some points that were raised in last week's presentation. Someone asked a question about using non-open source widgets in the solutions that you're supposed to present in the end of this hackathon. So the question is, in App 1, you need a communication channel between the certificate holder and the certificate body, and can it be implemented by a third-party chat widget? Yeah. So after checking the legal matters about this question, I can say that for the hackathon scenario, for the hackathon reality, we have no restriction about using non-open source solutions, for example, for this communication channel. But consider that if FSC decides to implement in real life, let's say like that, this solution for having a remote audit, uh, we prefer to use open source solutions because it will be more available. Because if we are using a non-open sourced one and we need, for example, to purchase a license, this would increase the costs of the certification process. So for the hackathon scenario, once again, we have no restrictions, but if we decide to do it, if you decide to apply your solution for real scenarios, we prefer not to deal with a purchasing license and have no increased costs. Finally, please have in mind that any external communication tool should comply with the General Data Protection Regulation. Okay, so it has not been mentioned what solution this participant intends to use, but please have in mind that we have to be in compliance with GDPR. Second point to quotation is about resources. We received some questions about the resources that we are providing you and when should I use these resources. Maybe one resource that I use it, for example, in app 1, this resource 2 and app 3 as well. So just to cover this point, remember that all the resources that we are making available to you is in that page, docusign2020.devpost.com/details/FSC. You have these 5 important resources there. One is the FSC challenge details that it's detailing everything about the 3 apps, general overview about them, how should they interact, and what we expect about each app. We have a second document that is the dynamic setup and FSC schema technical guide. This one is more focus on the technical part. You have like step-by-step guides on how to create the Dynamics trial instance, how to import a solution to Dynamics, importing data to Dynamics, how to use GIS. So you have more technical part in this document. And then we have 3 important folders, one for app 1, pre-assessment, app 2 for qualification of remote, and app 3, the remote audit and the certificate issue. When you click the link to the app 1 folder, you'll find these resources in this folder. So you have resource number 1 is related to the decision tree. A question that was covered last week, someone asked about, okay, where is resource 4? Resource 4 is with resource 2. As you can see, you have R2 and R4, solution import and data import. Inside this folder, you have 3 zip files, one for the solution file and the other for the data import containing CSVs related to each schema. And this spreadsheet, R2 FSC certificate management schema, basically is a spreadsheet containing more detailed information about each attribute of each entity in the certificate management schema, right? So let's say that it's an add-on on this resource number 2. You have resource 3, matrix of likelihood, resource 5, the additional questions for remote assessing, and resource 6A, B, C, D, that's about the annual volume summary, an example that we're giving to you, material accounting, some templates as well, the outsourcing agreement template and the labeling agreement template, data sharing confidentiality agreement, and the declaration of authenticity. Someone asked about resource 8. Where is resource 8? It's inside that technical guide. It's about geocoding, it's about geographic information system. There you have an URL and a key that should be used by participants. And in the next folder, app2 qualification, you have once again the decision tree as resource 1. And you also have a PDF file that is the justification for remote audit. Right? And in app3, that we are calling remote audit or virtual audit, you have the trademark license agreement template and a certificate template. Okay, but I think one important point to cover here: each app, as described in the technical, not in the technical document, but in the challenge details document, each app has its own purpose. But as we mentioned in this document and also in the presentation that we did on 9th of July, they should interact. They should be interconnective and collaborative. So the entire workflow presented in this document should be covered by these functionalities, by the 3 apps. What this means, basically, that we are presenting the resources on separate folders for you, but resources used in previous apps can be used in the other ones, especially the schemas that we are presenting to you in the data. So the database inputs and outputs used in app 1, they will be certainly used in apps 2 and 3 as well. So it's not because the solution file and the data import, they are in the folder regarding app 1, that you will not need them in app 2 and 3. Okay, so remember that the apps, they need to interact. They need to be interconnected. So I think this covers this point. We have now some questions about data import. So I will hand over to Vishal. He will cover this question and also the next question. So Vishal.
Thank you, Marcelo. And hello, everyone. This is Vishal. And here in this slide, we are going to cover the questions and the issues participants are facing while importing the data. So here in this slide, this question is from Pranesh on the data import of certificate schema. So the solution to this question is to follow the sequence of the data import mentioned here in this slide. As we can see that on the right hand side we have mentioned the certificate schema entities sequence, and on the left hand side we have mentioned the standard schema entity sequence. So as the data is interdependent within the this structure, so the master data need to be imported on the first step. So that's why we advise to have the data import of organization entity first, and after that the contact and certificate and so on. So likewise we have mentioned the sequence over here. We advise you to please follow this. You will get this data imported for you. So thank you, Pranesh, for this question. Can we have a next slide, please, Marcelo? Yeah, thank you. So date format issue. So we have got multiple questions on this topic. So we are trying to cover this point here in slide. So for this, whenever you guys are facing this kind of issues related to date format, so we need to actually compare the date format of source, and after that date format of target, and then we should try for the data import. So I'll share my screen and we'll have a demonstration on this topic. Let me share my screen. See my screen.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, to check the formats of your Dynamics instance, you have to click on the settings icon and click the personalization settings. So once this window is popped up, we have to click on the formats tab. So here the dynamics have mentioned the various formats of, for example, number, currency, time, short date, and long date. So if you click on this customize button here, you can see within this date tab they have mentioned the short date format. So please check your instance date format and the time format here. And the next step is we have to check the date time format of the data present in the CSV files. So here is my CSV file. For this demonstration purpose, I am using the contacts CSV file. So I have brought the date time columns together here just for the demonstration purpose. So here you can see the three columns I'm having within this contact CSV file. So for to check what is the date format for this CSV file, I'm right clicking on this cell and clicking on the format cells option here. So here we can see like the format of this cell is MDYYY space H colon MM. And if we check on my instance format, so it is dd slash mm slash yy. So this is different, and that's the reason we are getting the date time format error while importing the data. So to resolve this issue, we need to make the date time format same as our instance format. So I'm going again to my CSV file and I'm changing this format to make the change for all these column at a time. I'm selecting all these columns and then right clicking and going for the format cells option. I'm going clicking on the custom, and here I'm mentioning the same format which is exists for my instance. Okay, and now I'm saying okay. So you can see the date format is now changed like my trial instance, and now I'm saving this Excel, sorry, CSV file. Okay, I'm closing this, and now I'll try to import this data. So I'm jumping to my settings window. So from settings, now I'm following these steps for data import section. So okay, I'm going to data management, imports. So click on the import data. I'm choosing the same file which we have just modified. Clicking on next. No need for delimiter setting. No need for mappings. I'm selecting here the entity, that is contact. Clicking on next. By default, dynamic will map the fields. So I'm using this default mapping and I'm clicking on next. I'm ignoring the rest of the mappings. I'm clicking on the next. Allow duplicates, I'm selecting to no. This is by default settings. So I'm clicking on the, finally I'm clicking on submit button. So probably this will start importing your data. I'm clicking on the imports. This will summarize the things like the current status of this import, data import. Now it is transforming. So yes, you can see here we have got the data imported successfully. The three records were there total, and we have processed the three records successfully. Okay, so that's it from my side. Thank you guys. Over to you, Marcelo.
Thank you, Vishal, for the demonstration on how to solve these issues with the date, right? With the date format. Yeah, sometimes you have formats as month, day, and year. Sometimes you have formats with day, month, and year. So thank you for clarifying how to set a pattern and before importing the data to Dynamics. Um, the next about schemas, we received three questions, and I can say that they are pretty much related to the schemas. Number one is, should we be creating a schema for the resource number tricks of likelihood? Number two, what are the tables? What tables from certificate schema and requirements schema we must use for app one? And three, should we be creating a separate schema for the additional questions? Okay, considering that these three questions, they are about schemas, as you saw, we are providing you a solution file and also data import for the certificate schema and the standards and requirement schema. Yeah, so participants have the flexibility to modify these schemas as they wish, as they think it's necessary, right? When I say modify it in this schema, it's like if you wish to create a new entity, or if you wish to add a new attribute on an existing entity, if your solution demands it, or if it's your idea, you have the flexibility to do it, right? So some examples for the matrix of likelihood. You can modify the schema, but if you find a way of doing if without modifying, like directing the interface, for example, you can do it. For the resource number 5, the additional questions, you do not need to create a new schema, but you can also modify one of the existing schemas to accommodate this question and to build the solution as you wish. Okay, so you have the flexibility to do it. And we have some suggestions, for example, in the technical guide of a schema for a decision tree questionnaire for the part about conditions for remote auditing scenarios. That is a suggestion, but you can use different approaches. Okay. If you feel that your app will be, if you feel that for your app, it will be a good solution to create schemas for storing the matrix of likelihood, the resource number 3, you can choose to do it. If you feel that you want to modify a schema to insert the questions for the remote, you can do it. Okay. So it's pretty much up to you here. But remember that if you have modifications on your schema, as the 3 apps, they should be integrated, they should interact. Remember to follow the instructions that we presented last week on how to perform this solution exchange process, okay, with the other teams, and to follow the guidance on the release notes, as we mentioned in last week's presentation. If you have not seen it, you can check the recording of that presentation here in the DocuSign API Twitch channel. Just to have an example of some news, I'm presenting here 4 of the entities of requirement schema. Basically, you have the requirement type here on the right. You have the COC scenarios here on the top on the right side, and then you have the standards elements here on the left. Basically, you have these 3 entities. You have this created. You in the import the solution file, and also with the data import, the CSV files that we provided you, and you will need this data in app 1 or app 2, for example. Why? Because in a standard, you have several requirements. We are calling these standard elements. So, for example, in this standard, we have clause 4.1, 4.2, 4.2a, b, c, and also the content of these elements. You have the scenarios, as we mentioned in both doc, have different scenarios. For example, the company, it can be a primary producer, a secondary producer, a trader, and so on. And for the requirements, you have different classifications. For example, one requirement for one company can be obligatory, and for another type of company, it can be optional. So you have also one entity on the requirement schema, the standard requirement schemas, where you can actually see, for example, here, I will go to standard element 81. 81 here is the clause 4.1 in this standard. And for the scenario number 2, you mean for the secondary producer or processor, this clause is obligatory. Okay, but for example, if it's if it's about labeling, this clause can be optional or merely explanatory, right? So this is the solution that we provided for you in the schema. But if you feel, for example, that you want to add another attribute here, so and your app will demand that, will be a better solution for you, you can just add this attribute as you wish. Or if you feel that you want to create a new entity, you can. So, okay, we are providing you the data you are going to use. For example, this, I'm pretty sure that will be used to understand each clause is obligatory, optional, or not applicable to a different kind of scenario. This will be used. We are giving this information to you, but feel free to work with this information as you wish. Okay, so I think this cover this point about the flexibility of working with schemas, and we have here some questions from Gabriela about the change the certification process, and then I will hand over to my colleagues Chong Shan Zhang and also Joanna Nowakolska. I think they can cover Gabriela's questions. So,
thank you very much, Marcelo. This is Joanna speaking, and while you were presenting, I was answering questions from Gabriela in the chat box. Stacy was placing them in, but I think for the sake of transparency and maybe for the record, I can quickly cover them, while in the chat records, I hope that you will find references to this question. So let us start from the first one. And while I will be replying to those questions, then I will also invite Sean to add from his field experience. Sean is auditor. He was doing exactly this work as an auditor. He was also forest manager, so he's a great resource for us. So Gabriela's first question is whether there is any difference between certification process when you apply for certification for the first time versus when you are already a certificate holder. So yes, there is a difference, pragmatical difference, because when you apply for the first time, normally FSC system is new for you. You don't know very well requirements, you don't know the relationships between CBs, FSC, etc. So it's quite a lot of work normally to prepare to comply with FSC requirements. Also, from more technical perspective, of course, at the status of application, the record of a company and the specified specific future, hopefully, certificate is created for the first time in our record. So we don't have this entity yet in our records. Of course, when you are already in the system, when your certificate is expiring and you want to renew it, it's usually much simpler. You already have relationship with your auditors. So either you continue certifications with them, or you may change to another certification body, but you already know the system. You are familiar with the steps. So it's simply practically easier, as with everything that we are doing another time rather than for the first time. And also in terms of our records in the database, when we already have this entity in the system, the status of certificate and the information about validity of the certificates, the dates will change, but this record is already in the system. So for us, it's also, we can say, easier to manage. We don't need to create everything anew, or rather auditors don't need to enter this everything anew. That excludes situations when the scope of certification would dramatically change, and that would require completely new records. Then the second questions from Gabriela was how it works really in the period between receiving certification and expiration. So does it mean that company just can sit back and relax and wait for certificate to expire? So definitely it's not that easy. So during this 5-year cycle of certification, company is obliged to comply with FSC requirements at all times. During this first audit, if they have some minor issues that they still need to improve, a certification body, the auditor, will give them a deadline to correct them, and they will come, if this is necessary, to come to the site and see whether those corrections were made. Also, every year, certification body will do something that we call surveillance audit, or in more pragmatic, more colloquial language, annual audit. And this annual audit will focus on specific aspects, depending on how CB is knowing this company, what are the issues commonly occurring there, and will focus on proportion, normally on the proportion of the requirements. Some of the requirements will. So every year during this 5-year cycle, certification body and auditors will be evaluating company. Now, when it comes to the end of certification, then the additional full sort of recertification audit must happen. Apart from that, apart from the fact that certification body and auditors will be regularly coming and checking company, there may be certain situations where company will be required to perform activities even in between those audits. So, for example, our certificate holders are required to have complaint procedures. And if a stakeholder is raising issue with them, then there is a special process that they need to design and comply with to respond to such concerns. Also, if FSC or Assurance International Services are performing some investigations around integrity and credibility of our system, it may be that we will be approaching certain companies and asking them for additional, completely extra data on their transaction records, because we want to check the situation in the supply chain and follow up on certain allegations or on our own suspicions that something may be incorrect. So that about certification period. Now, Gabriela is asking next, what happens in terms of cancellation of the certificate, which we call expiration. So is company involving communication around that? So of course, yes. So whenever something happens with the status of certificates, I could hardly imagine any situation when company would not be diligently communicated in this regard, because even if it is just regular expiration of a certificate, normally auditor will reminding the company that expiration date is coming and trying to arrange the next audit. So company would be involved in that. If it happens that some issues were discovered by certification body during this annual audits or even in between of them, and there is a risk of suspension of a certificate, then of course company will be the first knowing about that and being informed about the situation, ask for corrections or ask for reaction to the situation, and eventually communicated about suspension. Also, in extreme cases, when FSC would discover serious issues with our trademark license agreements, in extreme cases, we also suspend such trademark license agreements. And in that case, obviously, and always communication given to companies. And finally, Gabriela was asking how the process of communication between company and auditors and certification body normally looks like, whether it is a phone or email, or something else. So that's exactly in the right direction in her question, because normally when company is applying for the certification for the first time, they may first approach local FSC office where they will hear or receive or help in terms of how to contact different available auditors out there, different certification bodies, and then they will be contacting those certification bodies either via phone or via email and trying to understand what certification with this given certification body would mean for them. So then the next step is that certification body will be in active contact with the company, trying to understand what kind of business they are in, what kind of material handling process they have, what kind of products that they produce. And this is all in order for certification body to understand what are the possible gaps, what are the applicable requirements, whether they are eligible for certification at all, and what are possibly the gaps that a given company would have to close to obtain FSC certification. So I think that I will stop here, and I will invite Sean to comment on any of the questions that Gabriela was submitting from your great background, Sean. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. That's very comprehensive. So my experience that, especially to the first question, I would say that for the applicant, normally there is very few records, because if you have a certificate for already valid for 5 years, which means that this company could potentially have many purchase area and have benefit from FSC certification. Also, the capacities and the people who manage the COC system have gained experience and for managing the procedures, make trainings, make the physical separations. So there's quite different. Also, during the first applicant, when auditor is on site, there's no real production records. Normally, it's kind of dummy data to showcasing that the company has conducted sufficient training, so that everybody has the awareness, has the knowledge about the COC requirement, to know that certified and not certified material has to be traceable, has to be separated physically. So then also regarding the question for the annual audit, I would say that when a certificate is granted, the validity for most of the is 5 years. However, many certificate holders, they will say anytime. It can be like first year or second year, or after 6 years, they drop their certificate simply because financial interest. Because, for example, their buyers are not interested in USC certified material, or there's a lack of raw material that stop them from producing FSC products. So they can drop at any time. And as long as they want to maintain the certificate, annual surveillance audit has to be conducted like every longest, like from 12 to 15 months, and all non-conformity has to be closed during the next surveillance. So use this time to go back to Gabriel's very in the last question, not from this full question, regarding what exactly the process of COC. So COC, chain of custody evaluation, it's kind of combination of both management system audit, also a product certification, which means that it's a management system that entails every company to conduct for sufficient training, to have procedure to prove to the auditor that they have the capacity to manage the production and sales and purchasing of the FSC material. Also, at the end, when they have the certification granted, they have the possibility of labeling the FSC products. So they can have the FSC logo on their packaging, on the products, on their promotional material, on their website, to say that our company has been certified and we are like responsible sourcing, etc. And for the auditing, every auditor has his own way, but normally there are like 3 ways of doing document review to see what kind of records, what kind of training material, what kind of procedure, operation manuals, this kind of document review. Also, they will. The second method would be interviews, to interview the people, to the managers, to the workers in the workshop, to the COC management representative. So interviewing to see that whether they have the knowledge of chain of custody management system. And the last method normally is to physically visit the workshops, the warehouses, to see how the material is stacked, how the labeling is set and how the physical segregation to say that which part of the material is certified, which is not. So there has to be clear separation and clear traceability. I think I will stop over here, and I will hand over to Marcelo.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Joanna and Sean, for your overview on the certification process. I think this is such a valuable explanation for this. Understand everything about coding language, but if you do not understand the process that is involved, where you should apply technology, so it makes no sense to apply actually this technology. So you need to understand the environment that you're working with. So thank you for clarifying Gabriela's questions, explanations about the COC certification process. Anything else to add? I don't see any more questions. If any of you do you have anything else to add?
Nothing else from my side, Marcelo. I just want to encourage participants that if you need even more insights, then we are always there, and we can arrange additional exchanges around that.
Thank you. So please continue using the Slack channel, our main communication questions. If you ask for support, if you have any issues, please. We have there 4 different channels, one general channel, one to find a teammate. For those who doesn't have a team yet, you have a specific channel for that. And the FSC tech help and the DocuSign API tech help. So you can monitor those channels. You can add your questions there. We are monitoring these channels daily. We are trying to answer your question in the beginning of this presentation about how the process works, how do we check it, and then if it's necessary to have further analysis or not. But okay, so we will have 2 more sections like this. Yeah, so stay tuned for that. And if we have nothing else to add, so I think we consider this presentation today finished. So thank you, everyone, and have a good evening, whatever you are. Thank you.